$3.2 million. That was the number staring at Dana from the pale green glow of her monitor at 7:43 on a Tuesday morning, tucked away in a budget line so vague it might as well have been labeled miscellaneous corporate wizardry. She sat in her cubicle under the hum of aging fluorescent lights, the air tinged with stale coffee and faint toner. The office was still quiet, just the IT guy eating his protein bar in the break room and the receptionist clicking through her morning emails. For Dana, this was her favorite time, before the executives arrived with their tailored smiles and shallow requests. This was when the building itself seemed honest. The number didn't belong. Contingency Fund, 7,399 Extraordinary Operations. It was supposed to cover emergencies, floods, fire alarms, snow removal that required a platoon of plows. Real, messy, necessary things. But the breakdown told a different story. $185,000, coded as compliance workshop, but billed to a ski resort in Aspen. $62,000, office wellness art, delivered to a private address that wasn't on the company's lease. $1. $2 million, satellite housing, downtown overflow. Dana knew every square foot the company leased, and this one wasn't on any plan she had ever seen. She scrolled further, her pulse quickening. The ledger stretched back years, each line a quiet luxury buried in the bureaucracy. No wonder Garrick Vale, the CFO, always had that calm, TED Talk voice. He wasn't managing a company, he was siphoning it like a private trust. "Morning, Dana," chirped Sharon from accounts payable, dropping a stack of invoices onto her desk without slowing down. "You're the only one I trust to make sense of this mess." Dana forced a smile. She was used to it, being the invisible janitor of numbers, the one who fixed everyone else's sloppiness without complaint. She had built her reputation on loyalty, on precision, on never missing a mismatch. But the executives never saw her as more than background noise. That morning, her coffee went cold as she stared at the numbers. She could hear the building waking up, the elevator ding, the squeak of leather shoes on tile, the first conference room doors clicking shut. And she thought about the past 5 years, every late night she stayed to reconcile ledgers, every time she covered for someone else's mistake, every thankless audit she prepared alone. All for what? When Garrick swept through the finance wing an hour later, he barely nodded at her. His cufflinks sparkled, his cologne was expensive in that heavy-handed way men use when they want to fill a room without saying anything. He didn't even look at the monitor where his kingdom of fabricated expenses glowed bright as neon. "Dana," he said softly, like a father correcting a child. "I'll need you to clean up a small discrepancy in 7399 before quarter close. Just make it smooth." He didn't wait for her answer. He never did. She watched him disappear into the glass-walled boardroom, where the directors laughed too loudly. Something inside her shifted, not a spark, but a low, steady burn. For years, Dana's loyalty had been her armor. But now she realized it had only ever been their shield. She clicked open a private folder on her desktop. Years of ledgers. PDF invoices. Badge logs. Metadata trails. She had everything neatly archived, waiting. Not because she expected this moment, but because her loyalty had always been to the numbers, not the men who abused them. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. This wasn't going to be fixed with a polite correction. This was going to be a reckoning. And for the first time in years, Dana smiled. The finance department had a rhythm. By 10 in the morning, the printers whirred like restless bees, paper stacks gathered in uneven towers, and phones rang with the false urgency of people trying to sound busier than they were. Dana slipped into it the way she always did, quiet, efficient, invisible. She had mastered invisibility years ago. In meetings, she sat 2 chairs from the end, where no one ever asked direct questions. In emails, she kept her responses factual and short, always looping in whoever needed credit. She was the ghost that made everything work, and everyone was perfectly happy to forget she was there. Until they needed her. That afternoon, Sharon from Accounts Payable leaned against her cubicle wall, chewing a pen cap. Garrick's office wants those expense justifications pulled. Can you handle it? You're faster than the rest of us. Dana nodded, already sliding open the metal drawer at the base of her desk, the one she jokingly called the morgue. It held copies of old ledgers, half-processed invoices, memos stamped for review that no one ever actually reviewed. Everyone else treated it like a trash bin. Dana treated it like a time capsule. She flipped through, the familiar scratch of paper under her nails. Every line told a story. Some were boring, miscued amounts, duplicate entries, vendors with names so bland they could put you to sleep. But others, those stood out. Retreats billed to wellness, art to morale, consultants to security. Patterns so rehearsed they felt scripted. The script had been running for years. She paused when she found an old memo signed in Garrick's hand, the ink slightly smudged. It was a simple instruction, code to 7399. No explanation, no supporting documents. Just an instruction, as if that expense line were a bottomless drawer meant to swallow anything inconvenient. She stared at the signature. For 5 years, she had trusted it meant direction. Now it looked more like a permission slip for theft. The office air buzzed with the sound of voices rising from the glass boardroom. Garrick was in there, laughing with 2 directors. It was the same laugh he used during all-hands meetings when he told employees how much he valued transparency. Dana closed the drawer. Slowly. Carefully. The rest of the office carried on, the churn of numbers and noise masking the decision hardening inside her. She wasn't going to patch their holes anymore. Not this time. Her loyalty had been misused, twisted into a shield for men who never even learned her last name. But she had something they didn't, patience. She didn't need to rush. The numbers would keep. And so would she. The next morning, Dana arrived earlier than usual. The building was still half asleep, the lobby echoing with the hollow clatter of the janitor's cart. She liked these hours best, when the fluorescent lights hummed like nervous witnesses and the air was still heavy with last night's silence. At her desk, she booted up the system and pulled the ledger again. Not the polished one Garrick and the directors loved to parade in quarterly meetings, but the raw, unfiltered logs, the ones only she bothered to reconcile. Most people avoided them because they were messy, tangled in codes and cross-references. Dana lived for that kind of mess. The contingency account stretched across years. Dozens of small luxuries, a few big ones, all tucked away where no one cared to look. It reminded her of a sweater snagged on a nail, pull the wrong thread, and the whole thing might unravel. So she tugged. The first thread was simple, a charge marked as overflow housing. On paper, it looked legitimate enough. But when she traced the vendor's address, her screen filled with a listing for a high-rise apartment building downtown. Not office space. Not storage. Apartments. Her stomach tightened. She printed the invoice quietly, slipping it into a folder at the back of her drawer. No one would notice, no one ever did. The second thread came wrapped in something prettier. A payment to an art consultant, coded under wellness. Curious, she followed the trail through purchase orders and approvals until she landed on a glossy catalog page, abstract installations with 4-digit price tags. She recognized one immediately, it hung in Garrick's corner office. She'd seen him lean against it during conference calls, the bold swirls of color making him look like a visionary instead of a man hiding behind other people's work. The third thread was harder to pin down. A series of small expenses, recurring every month, marked only as facilitation fees. The amounts weren't large enough to draw attention, but together they added up. Dana copied the entries into her private notes. The pattern was too deliberate to be innocent. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the rows of numbers glowing on her monitor. They looked so harmless, black text on a pale background. But she could feel the weight behind them. Lies always had weight. The office around her began to wake up, Sharon dropping files onto her desk with a laugh, someone spilling coffee in the hallway, the faint echo of a director greeting Garrick with too much cheer. No one noticed Dana watching. No one noticed her folder of printouts growing heavier. That was fine. They'd see soon enough. Dana's cubicle was small, wedged between the humming printer and a wall that carried every vibration of the elevator shaft. Most people hated it. For her, it was perfect. Noise-covered secrets. She started with a plain manila folder, slipped it into the bottom drawer, and labeled it with something so boring no one would bother opening it, Q2 vendor recons. From there, she began feeding it. Not with originals, she wasn't reckless, but with copies, quiet printouts timed between Sharon's gossip breaks and the IT guy's coffee runs. Each page had its own story. The downtown apartment invoice. The art catalog. The recurring facilitation fees. By themselves, they were just oddities, explainable with enough smooth talking. But stacked together, they began to hum with a different kind of energy. A rhythm of misuse. By the end of the week, the folder was thicker. Too thick. So she started a second one, then a third, each buried under stacks of dull expense reports that no one wanted to touch. Dana's desk became a library of overlooked truths disguised as clerical clutter. Her evenings changed, too. She stopped going straight home. Instead, she stayed late in the office, the kind of late that didn't raise eyebrows because everyone assumed she was just that loyal employee. And she was just not to them anymore. On the seventh night, she slipped into the print server corner. The air was cooler there, laced with dust and faint ozone. She logged in on a terminal no one used and started pulling metadata, timestamps, batch logs, sign-ins. Her fingers moved quickly, practiced. She wasn't stealing. She wasn't hacking. She was simply collecting what was already there, what the system itself had quietly recorded. That's when she noticed something odd. The apartment invoices weren't tied to the usual accounting chain. They bypassed approval levels, showing up in the ledger fully coded, as if they'd slid in through a side door. Dana frowned. There were only a few people with that kind of override power. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A new email from HR, subject, development plan meeting. She froze. The text was short, clipped, and impersonal. Please meet with HR and finance leadership tomorrow at 9 a.m. to discuss recent discrepancies identified under your entries. Her entries. Dana stared at the screen until the words blurred. She wasn't careless. She never misplaced a number. If they were accusing her, it wasn't by accident. She closed the terminal, gathered her folder, and walked out into the night. The city hummed beyond the glass doors, neon and indifferent. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just about uncovering what they were hiding. It was about surviving the moment they decided she was expendable. And tomorrow, they'd try. The HR conference room was designed to look harmless. Frosted glass walls, a round table with no sharp corners, a bowl of wrapped mints placed precisely in the center. But Dana knew better. Rooms like this were built for control, the kind where people smiled while cutting your knees out from under you. She arrived at 8:58 a.m., deliberately 2 minutes early. Garrick was already there, his suit a shade darker than the polished table, cufflinks winking like secrets. Beside him sat Angela from HR, the kind of woman who could make the word policy sound like a lullaby. Dana, Garrick said, voice smooth as honey steeped in chamomile. Thanks for coming on such short notice. Angela smiled, sliding a folder toward her. We just need some clarity around a few entries under your login. Nothing major. We're sure it's just a misunderstanding. Dana opened the folder. Her throat tightened. There they were, invoices coded under her name. The downtown apartment. The art consultant. Even the ski retreat. All of them tied to her user ID, her initials stamped in the audit trail. Her audit trail. But Dana knew those entries. She hadn't touched them. Not once. See, Garrick said, leaning forward, voice low and calm, this is the kind of discrepancy that can cause a real issue if auditors were to find it. But we believe in you. We think you just need to be more careful. Angela chimed in softly, as if reading from a script. That's why we'd like to put you on a development plan. Coaching, oversight, just to make sure this doesn't happen again. Dana's hands stayed flat on the table, but inside she was burning. They weren't just setting her up, they were erasing her. Years of loyalty, reduced to a scapegoat file. They thought she would fold, nod, and thank them for the chance to keep her job under their thumb. She looked at Garrick. His smile was too confident. He'd done this before. He thought the paperwork was a noose, and she was already in it. Of course, Dana said, her voice calm, almost polite. I'll review the entries carefully. Garrick's smile widened. He thought he'd won. But Dana wasn't going to fight the way they expected. Not with denial, not with pleas. She'd fight with the one thing Garrick couldn't control, the trail he didn't realize she had already started to weave. She slid the folder back across the table, her expression neutral. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Inside, her resolve hardened. They wanted her quiet. Invisible. Erased. Instead, she would make herself unforgettable. That night, Dana didn't go straight home. Her badge clicked at 9:17 p.m., long after the last director had disappeared in a black car service. The office was quiet, humming with the mechanical patience of machines left running overnight. She sat at her desk under the glow of a single lamp, the rest of the floor in shadows. If Garrick thought a few forged entries were enough to bury her, he didn't understand who he was dealing with. Dana began with the logs. Every entry in the system left behind footprints, even if someone tried to cover them. Badge swipes, session start times, IP addresses, details so boring most people ignored them. But not Dana. She pulled her own user activity for the nights those suspicious entries had been posted. And there it was, her credentials in the system on Saturday nights she hadn't been in the building. She cross-checked with badge records. Her ID hadn't opened a single door. The system said she was inside, but the locks said otherwise. She printed the logs carefully, stacking them in her secret folder. At 10:03 p.m., she moved to the print server corner, the place she trusted more than her own cubicle. The blue light flickered on her face as she accessed job histories. The invoices tied to her login had been printed from Garrick's assistant's workstation. Not hers. Not even close. Her chest tightened, equal parts fury and grim satisfaction. They weren't just careless, they were arrogant. They thought no one cared enough to look past the first layer of data. By midnight, her folder was heavier again. But weight wasn't enough. She needed leverage. Something that wouldn't just prove she was innocent, but that would flip the blame back where it belonged. She opened the system's vendor master list. Half the names looked routine: cleaning companies, office supply distributors, consultants. But one stood out. A vendor tied to those facilitation fees. Its mailing address wasn't a business park or a suite. It was a post office box. And its registered owner? A Shell LLC. Dana's lips curled into the smallest smile. She copied the record and tucked it away. The city outside pulsed with midnight traffic. She shut off her monitor, gathered her folder, and walked toward the elevator. Her reflection in the glass doors looked calmer than she felt. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was setting a trap. And they had already stepped into it. Dana had always worked alone. It was safer that way, fewer eyes, fewer risks. But even she knew there were limits to what she could pull from her cubicle and the print server corner. To expose the scale of Garrick's scheme, she needed someone with access beyond her reach. So the next evening, she found herself in the server room, leaning against the cold metal rack while Marcos untangled a nest of cables. Marcos had been with IT as long as Dana had been in finance. He was quiet, practical, and utterly unbothered by office politics, which made him useful. "You ever notice anything strange in user logs?" she asked, casual, as if she were making small talk. Marcos grunted. "Define strange." "Like someone logging in from one place, but their badge doesn't show them in the building." He looked up, one eyebrow raised. "Yeah. Happens when credentials are cloned. Rare, but not impossible." Dana nodded slowly, as if the idea were new to her. "If someone cloned my credentials, would there be a way to prove it?" Marcos straightened, arms crossed. "Depends how clever they were. But the system always leaves a footprint somewhere. Wrong IP address, mismatched session time, a printer log that doesn't add up." "Why? Something happen?" Dana hesitated. She couldn't tell him everything, not yet. "Let's just say I don't like surprises." Marcos smirked. "Then you're in the wrong company." Still, he didn't ask more. And 2 days later, a small envelope appeared on her desk, slipped under a pile of invoices. Inside was a USB stick with a single note: "Pulled your logs. You're clean. Whoever's messing with you isn't careful." Dana stared at the USB for a long moment. This was more than proof. This was ammunition. She plugged it in that night, alone in her apartment, the glow of her laptop reflecting off the stack of folders she kept hidden in her closet. The files Marcos had pulled were meticulous login timestamps that didn't align with her badge, IP addresses from workstations she never touched, even metadata from printers on the executive floor. The best part? The trail didn't just clear her. It pointed somewhere else. Garrick's assistant. One of the directors. Entries posted late at night, paper trails leading back to the shadow budget she'd been tracing. Dana leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was winning. But she also knew, the moment she made her move, they'd fight back. Hard. So she closed the laptop, slid the USB into her binder of evidence, and whispered to the quiet of her apartment. "Not yet." By the following week, Dana's folders had grown into a miniature archive, 3 binders thick, labeled so blandly that even the most curious coworker wouldn't bother pulling them from her desk drawer. But papers alone weren't enough. If she was going to turn whispers into proof, she needed walls. Buildings didn't lie the way people did. So she paid a quiet visit to facilities. The manager, Tom, was the kind of man who lived in blueprints and service contracts. His office smelled faintly of dust and lemon cleaner, its shelves lined with rolled-up floor plans like sleeping scrolls. Dana appeared at his doorway with a stack of invoices in hand, looking as tired and overworked as any finance employee. "Hey, Tom," she said softly. "Quick favor. I'm trying to reconcile some service charges, but the square footage numbers don't match what I've got in our lease summaries. Think you could print me the latest certifications?" Tom barely looked up. "Sure. Emailed or hard copy?" "Hard copy," Dana said quickly, knowing those were harder to erase. 10 minutes later, she walked out with a packet stamped "Property Management, received." The pages were dry and technical, but Dana's eyes scanned them like a detective reading confessions. There it was. Square footage for their primary lease, plus an overflow space listed under the same address, marked as temporary corporate housing. Her pulse quickened. She flipped to the next page. The overflow space wasn't some storage room. It was an entire floor, furnished, serviced, maintained monthly. The numbers lined up perfectly with the satellite housing expenses in Garrick's shadow budget. Dana slid the packet into her binder. Another stone added to the wall she was building against them. That night at her apartment, she spread everything across her kitchen table. The binders, the logs, the floor plan packets, the USB Marcos had given her. She sat cross-legged, the radiator ticking softly behind her, and started weaving the pieces together like a puzzle only she could see. Apartment invoices, tied to square footage records. Art consultant fees, tied to wellness budgets. Facilitation payments, tied to a shell LLC. All roads led back to 7,399, Garrick's magic drawer. But as she highlighted connections, her phone buzzed. New email, Garrick Vale, mandatory finance sync, tomorrow 8:30 a.m. Her stomach sank. That wasn't a normal meeting. Garrick didn't call syncs unless he wanted to remind everyone who owned the room. And if he'd noticed her questions in facilities. Dana closed the binders, one by one, until the table was clear again. She tucked them back into the closet, locked the door, and leaned against it. The walls might have leases. But tomorrow, she'd be sitting in a glass-walled room with a man who knew exactly how to break people without leaving a mark. The next morning, the finance team filed into the glass-walled conference room like schoolchildren summoned to the principal's office. Garrick sat at the head of the table, perfectly framed by the abstract art Dana now knew had been bought with company money. His smile was wide, rehearsed, and full of menace disguised as charm. Dana took her usual seat, 2 down from the end, easy to overlook. She set her notebook on the table, pen poised, face blank. Team, Garrick began, his voice smooth enough to butter bread. We're heading into quarter close, and accuracy is everything. I've noticed sloppiness. Entries that don't align with expectations. That can't happen. Not here. His gaze slid across the table, pausing, just a fraction too long, on Dana. Angela from HR sat quietly in the corner, legal pad ready. She wasn't here to participate, she was here to witness. A warning. Dana kept her breathing even. She could feel the weight of the binders she'd hidden in her closet, the packet from facilities, the USB stick in her desk. Proof, waiting like a loaded chamber. But here, she couldn't use it. Here, she had to play the role they still thought she believed in, the invisible loyalist. Sharon from Accounts Payable spoke up nervously. I thought Dana already fixed the discrepancies. Dana's pen tapped once, sharp against paper. Sharon hadn't meant to protect her, but the words shifted the room. Garrick's smile tightened. Yes, he said smoothly, Dana has been diligent. But diligence without awareness can create more problems than it solves. It was a warning shot. Subtle, but direct. Dana looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. Calm. Steady. Of course. I'll review everything again. Silence stretched. Then Garrick nodded, satisfied, and moved on to performance metrics no one cared about. The rest of the meeting blurred, charts on screens, forced laughter, Sharon scribbling notes she'd never read again. Dana's pulse slowed. She'd survived the test. For now. But as the meeting broke up, Garrick caught her on the way out. His hand brushed her arm, light but firm enough to make her stop. Dana, he murmured, too softly for anyone else to hear. Be careful. The numbers can bury people who don't respect them. He let go, walking away without another glance. Dana stood there a moment, her notebook clutched tight. The message was clear, he knew she was looking too closely. Which meant her window was closing. If she wanted to survive this, she needed to move her evidence beyond company walls, before Garrick found a way to bury her for good. Dana left the finance sink with Garrick's warning still echoing in her ears. By the time she reached her cubicle, she'd already made a decision. It was time to move her archive out of the building. If she kept everything in her desk and apartment, it was only a matter of time before someone noticed. That night, she stayed late again, waiting until the hum of the office settled into its after-hours silence. She packed the binders carefully into her tote, wrapped in a plain sweater so they looked like nothing more than weekend work. The plan was simple: scan the pages at home, upload them to a secure drive she'd set up under a false name, and then, when the time was right, drop them where they'd hurt most, the the auditors. But when she got home and opened the first binder, her stomach dropped. Pages were missing. Not many, but enough. The invoice for the Aspen Compliance Workshop. The memo with Garrick's signature. A log sheet she'd pulled from Marcos's USB. All gone. In their place, the binder closed neatly, as if nothing had ever been removed. Dana sat frozen at her kitchen table, the radiator hissing like it knew something she didn't. She flipped through the other binders, some pages still there, but others missing. Whoever had touched them had been careful. Not sloppy. Not rushed. Her mind raced. The only time they'd been vulnerable was in her cubicle drawer. Someone had been there. She locked the binders back up and yanked open her laptop, logging into her secure drive. Empty. The test uploads she'd left there days earlier, gone. The folder existed, but the contents had been wiped. Her phone buzzed. A new email. From IT support. Subject: Routine Security Audit, User Storage Accounts. Dana's breath caught. A routine audit? Tonight? She leaned back in her chair, pulse thundering. This wasn't coincidence. Garrick had moved faster than she thought. He wasn't just setting her up, he was scrubbing her clean. Erasing her evidence before she could use it. And the worst part? It meant he knew exactly what she'd been collecting. The next morning, Dana found Marcos waiting by the coffee machine. He didn't look like himself, shoulders tight, eyes darting to the hallway as if every sound carried a threat. "We need to stop talking," he said quietly, without meeting her eyes. Dana froze mid-step. "What do you mean?" Marcos handed her a paper cup, more a prop than a drink. His voice dropped even lower. "Compliance called me last night. They had a list of system queries, mine. Yours. They knew exactly what I'd pulled. Too exact. Garrick must have flagged it." Her stomach tightened. And, Marco sighed, "I like my job. I've got kids. Mortgage. I can't get caught in whatever this is." He finally looked at her, guilt plain in his face. "I'm sorry, Dana. You're on your own." He walked away, leaving her with the bitter steam of untouched coffee curling in the air. Back at her desk, Dana tried to focus, but the office itself seemed to lean in closer. Sharon from Accounts Payable stopped by with forced cheer, dropping a pile of urgent invoices that didn't need her. Angela from HR strolled past twice, her eyes flicking to Dana's drawer each time. Even Garrick made a show of pausing at her cubicle, hand resting on the divider as he asked the air, "Everyone clear on their priorities this week?" By lunch, Dana couldn't shake the feeling she was being watched. She confirmed it at 2:17 p.m. when she swiped her badge into the storage room to retrieve an old file. On the inside shelf, where no one ever looked, sat a small black device blinking red, a motion camera. She stepped back slowly, heart hammering. Cameras in storage rooms weren't standard. Someone had put it there. For her. Her phone buzzed. An email notification. From HR, Angela Lee. Subject: Immediate review of unauthorized documents. Dana's chest went cold. Her mind raced. Garrick had stripped pages from her binders, wiped her drive, cornered her ally, and now HR was circling with the accusation he'd been aiming for all along, that she was the thief. The scapegoat. She closed the storage room door, every nerve in her body braced. This wasn't survival anymore. It was war. And if Garrick thought she'd fold, he had no idea how dangerous a loyal woman becomes once her loyalty is betrayed. Dana didn't respond to HR's email. Not right away. Let them think she was cornered, fumbling, afraid. That's what Garrick wanted, a compliant scapegoat who would sign whatever paper they slid across the table. But fear wasn't what filled her as she sat at her desk that afternoon. It was calculation. She couldn't rely on binders anymore. Garrick had already proven he could reach into her files, scrub her drives, even plant cameras where no one should be looking. If she wanted to win, she needed to push the game somewhere he didn't control. Somewhere outside the walls of the company. At 5:42 p.m., when most of the office had drained away, Dana walked to the maintenance stairwell. No cameras there, she'd checked before. Her footsteps echoed on the concrete as she descended to the lower lobby, where the property manager's office sat tucked behind a door no one ever noticed. Linda Cho looked up from a stack of lease documents, glasses sliding down her nose. "Finance?" she asked, surprised. "Not many of you wander down here." Dana set a folder on the desk. Not her full archive, just one packet, the square footage certification Tom had given her, and the matching invoices coded under satellite housing. Enough to raise eyebrows, but not enough to tie back to her if Garrick sniffed it out. "I think your office is being billed for space that doesn't exist in our lease," Dana said evenly. "Or, space being used for something it shouldn't be." Linda flipped through the papers, her eyes narrowing. She tapped a line with her pen. "This isn't in your contract. This looks like a rider we never signed." "Exactly," Dana said. Linda sat back, folding her arms. "If what you're saying is true, my owners are going to have a serious problem with your leadership." Dana kept her face neutral, though her pulse was pounding. "Then maybe you should pull the payment history yourself. If it's nothing, fine. But if it isn't, better you catch it than an auditor." For a long moment, Linda studied her. Then she nodded once, sharp. "Leave it with me." Dana thanked her and slipped back upstairs, heart racing. By the time she reached her cubicle, an unread email waited on her monitor. From HR, Angela Lee. Subject, follow-up, urgent. The trap was closing. But now, for the first time, she'd set one of her own. Let Garrick keep pushing. The harder he pressed, the more likely the walls outside his control would start pressing back. The summons came the next morning. An email marked high importance lit up Dana's inbox at 8:07 a.m. From HR, Angela Lee. Subject, immediate review, compliance breach. No pretense of politeness this time. It was the kind of email you didn't ignore if you valued your badge access. At 9 o'clock sharp, Dana walked back into the same glass-walled room where the mints never moved and the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Garrick was already seated, posture relaxed, like a man who believed he had written the ending. Angela sat beside him, legal pad ready, pen poised like a scalpel. "Dana," Angela began, voice soft but firm. "We've conducted a review of your files. Yesterday, a device was found in the storage room where you accessed documents outside your scope. Combined with flagged entries under your ID, this paints a concerning picture." Dana sat still, hands folded on the table. "Concerning how?" Garrick leaned forward, sliding a slim folder across the table. "This looks like theft. Unauthorized retention of company property. Potentially even fraud." Inside were photocopies, her binders. But altered. Pages rearranged, notes she'd never written, dates that didn't match. It was a counterfeit archive, designed to frame her as a thief hoarding files she had no business touching. Angela's pen tapped once. "We want to give you a chance to explain before we escalate further." Dana kept her expression neutral, though her pulse thundered in her ears. They had moved faster than she expected. Marcos was gone, her files tampered with, her digital trail scrubbed. Garrick had built a glass trap, one where the evidence would damn her no matter how loudly she protested. She inhaled slowly, then said, "I understand." Garrick smiled faintly, as if savoring a victory. "Good. Cooperation will make this easier." Dana closed the folder gently. "I'll need to review these documents before I comment." Angela frowned. "There's not much to review." "Oh, there is," Dana said evenly, standing. "And I'll make sure the right people see them." Garrick's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. He wasn't used to her refusing the role of scapegoat. Dana walked out of the room without another word, folder tucked under her arm. The eyes of her coworkers followed her down the hallway, whispers rising like static. She knew what Garrick thought, that he'd buried her. But what he didn't know was that Linda Cho, the property manager, had already begun pulling records of her own. And once the walls started talking, no amount of forged paper could silence them. By midweek, the building's polished calm began to fracture. Dana could feel it in the way directors walked faster through the halls, phones pressed tight to their ears. In the way Angela from HR avoided eye contact when she passed her desk. Something had shifted. She found out why at 4:22 p.m., when a ripple of whispers spread across the finance floor. Property management is here. Dana kept her head down, but her heart pounded. Through the glass walls of the executive suite, she saw Linda Cho stride in, a thick folder tucked under her arm. No blazer, no hesitation. She was flanked by the building owner's legal rep, a man with silver hair and the kind of posture that belonged in a courtroom. They didn't ask politely. They walked straight past the receptionist and into Garrick's office, shutting the door behind them. For nearly an hour, muffled voices bled through the glass. Garrick's smooth tone was gone. Dana could hear the edge in it even through the walls. Papers rustled, voices rose, and once, the silver-haired man's hand slammed flat on the table. At 5:30, the door opened. Linda walked out first, her expression sharp but satisfied. Garrick followed, pale beneath his polished calm. The directors trailing behind him looked rattled, their usual practiced smiles abandoned. Dana stayed at her desk, eyes on her monitor, pretending to finish a report. But her pulse thrummed with the truth. Linda had found something. She'd pulled the payment history, matched it to the bogus lease writers, and confronted leadership where they couldn't spin it away. Minutes later, an all-staff email pinged. Subject: Facility Access Updates. Body: Effective immediately, overflow spaces are restricted pending review. Do not attempt entry until further notice. The message was clinical, but Dana knew what it meant. Garrick's secret apartment had been exposed. Still, she didn't celebrate. Not yet. Garrick was too practiced, too dangerous, to collapse this easily. If he sensed the walls closing in, he'd try to shift the weight onto her one last time. And when he did, Dana would be ready. The final blow didn't come in Garrick's office. It came in the boardroom, under the sterile glow of recessed lights, with auditors, directors, and a few too many lawyers crammed around the polished table. Dana sat quietly at the far end, binder open, hands steady. She hadn't been invited, officially, but Linda Cho had insisted she attend. She started this, Linda had told the board. She should be here when it ends. Garrick tried one last performance. His voice was smooth again, his smile practiced, his story neatly wrapped: rogue employee, unauthorized files, clerical errors blown out of proportion. He gestured toward Dana without naming her, painting her as the perfect scapegoat. And then the auditors began asking questions. About the missing signatures on expense approvals. About the fabricated lease writers Linda had uncovered. About the Shell LLC tied to facilitation fees. And then, about the login logs Marcos had slipped to Dana, now printed and sealed in a binder with the auditor's stamp across the top. Can you explain, the lead auditor asked Garrick evenly, why your assistant's workstation processed invoices coded under Dana's ID? The room went silent. For once, Garrick had no script. He stammered, tried to pivot, but the paper trail spoke louder than he ever could. Every forged page, every shadow payment, every misuse of $7,399 had come home to roost. By the end of the session, Garrick was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. 2 directors quietly resigned before the week was out. And the shadow budget, the one they'd all dipped into for years, was clawed back, audited, and dismantled piece by piece. Dana didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Watching them choke on the truth was satisfaction enough. The conclusion she drew was simple, carved deep into her bones: loyalty is wasted on people who see it as weakness. The only thing worth loyalty is the truth itself, because the truth never betrays you. She kept her job, but more importantly, she kept her dignity. And this time, she wasn't invisible anymore. So let me ask you, if you were Dana, would you have stayed in that company to rebuild after burning the rot out of it? Or would you have walked away with your binders, knowing you'd already won? Every story lives as long as it's remembered. A like is your trace in this story, and a subscription is your ticket to the next ones.